अष्टोत्तरशतश्रीमद् श्रील भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। नितिल प्रविष्ट विष्णुपाद अष्टोत्तरशतश्रीमद् श्रील भक्ति विज्ञान केशव गोसाई महाराज की जय। नितिल प्रविष्ट विष्णुपाद अष्टोत्तरशतश्रीमद् श्रील भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोसाई प्रभुपाद की जय। नितिल प्रविष्ट महाभागवत श्रील गोक्षरस प्रभुजी महाराज की जय। नितिल प्रविष्ट श्री सच्चिदानंद भक्ति विनोद ठाकुर की जय। नितिल प्रविष्ट वैष्णव सार्वभौम श्री जगन्नाथ दास बाबूजी महाराज की जय। श्री रूप गौरिया गुरु वर्ग की जय। श्री रूप सनातन भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री जीव गोपाल पतदास रघुनाथ शार गोसाई प्रभु की जय। श्री स्वरूप दामोदर राय रामानंद ऋषि गौर पार्षद वृंद की जय। नाम चैश्ल हरिदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासरी गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री क्षेत्र मंडल गौर मंडल व्रज मंडल मथुरा वृंदावन धाम की जय। सर्व अविश्य विराट गिरिराज महाराज की जय। श्री राधा कुंड श्याम कुंड की जय। श्री मुन देवी गंग देवी की जय। श्री तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी की जय। श्री भक्ति देवी की जय। श्री पूर्णमासी योगमाय की जय। श्री गोपेश्वर महादेव की जय। ग्रंथराज श्री की जय। श्री हरि नाम संकीर्तन की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। धन्यवाद। प्रणाम जयंतीरा माता जी। Okay. ओम ज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जना शलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। नमो विष्णुपदाय राधिकाय प्रियात्मने श्रीमद्भक्तिवेदान्त नारायणेति नामिने। नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनेति नामिने। वंशकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। नमो महावदन्याय कृष्णप्रेमप्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्णचैतन्य नाम्ने गौरतिशे नमः। गुरुवे गौरचन्द्राय राधिकाय तदालये कृष्णाय कृष्णभक्ताय तरभक्ताय नमो नमः। यं प्रव्रजन्तम् अनुपेतमपेतकृत्यं द्वैपायनो विरहकातर आजुहाव पुत्रेति तन्मयतया तरवोऽभिनेदुस्तं सार्वभूतं हृदयां मुनिमानतोऽस्मि। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। शृण्वतं स्वकथा कृष्ण पुण्यश्रवणकीर्तन हृदन्तस्थो ह्यभद्राणि विधुनोति सुहृत्सतम्। नष्टप्रायेष्वभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवत्युत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्ठिकी। तवैवास्मि न जीवामि त्वया विना इति विज्ञाय राधे त्वां नायमां शरणान्तिकम्। Oops. भक्त्याविहीना अपराधलक्षाय क्षिप्ताष्टकामादितरङ्गमध्ये कृपामयि त्वं शरणं प्रपन्ना वृन्दे नमस्ते चरणारविन्दम्। भज श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानन्द श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासरि गौर भक्तवृन्द। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। So, what we read yesterday. The day before yesterday, we read about the jiva in the conditioned state. The cause of conditioning of the jiva is false identification with material nature, Prakṛti. And the solution to get out of this identification is to gradually control the mind through bhakti, yoga, and virakti, through detachment, renunciation. And then Kapila Devi explains to his mother the process of attaining liberation through yoga. So we perform astanga yoga, hearing, and the process is astanga yoga, hearing, and faith in the Lord. And then the 18 qualities to be cultivated by jnanis. Let's see, what are those 18 qualities? Okay. Yeah, so these are the 18 qualities: equality to all jivas, no enmity, no intimate connection, celibacy, being grave, etc., etc. These are all the 18 qualities to be cultivated by the jnani. And then a liberated soul, then there's the characteristics of the supersoul. A liberated soul realizes the supersoul to be manifest as a reflection even in the false ego, the cause of Prakṛti, of material nature, the revealer of the material elements. The supersoul is pervading into everything, and he is one without a second. And then how do we, inferring the presence of the soul and the supersoul. So just like we see the sun in the sky, and then that sun reflected on water, and then we see the reflection of the water on the wall. From that we can infer the presence of the sun. And with the pure jiva, because the jiva is influenced by threefold ahankar, which is reflected in the body, senses, and mind. This ego, which is controlled by goodness, passion, and ignorance. So we see that reflected in the senses, the body, and the mind. And so from that we can infer the presence of the jiva. And the Supreme Lord, he's reflected in everything by his energies. Understanding of the pure devotee. Therefore, from that we can infer the presence of the Lord. I have to reread that in the book. Anyhow, the soul without material coverings. The soul is pure, alert, and free from the false ego. Yet he appears to be covered by the false ego and its products, senses, and the mind. The false ego, although he can feel his existence vividly, he thinks that he is lost and feels distressed, like a person who has lost his wealth. With the disappearance of the false ego and its products during deep sleep or universal destruction. But when he realizes that he is a pure individual soul by mature understanding, then the situation he accepts under false ego becomes manifest to him. He sees his real condition. So then Devahuti, she asks, how is liberation possible? This is our fourth question. How is liberation possible? Since material nature and the living entity are attracted to each other eternally, how is their separation possible? Although not the doer, he is attached to the modes and Prakṛti. The jiva is attached to the modes, and Prakṛti acts on the jiva and binds him. Then how is liberation possible? Fear might reappear. Even if the great fear of bondage is sometimes avoided by Sankhya, it may still reappear since its cause has not ceased. And then we read, so Kapila Dev's answer, he said, One can get liberation by intense practice that includes intense bhakti for a long time, not having any desire for fruitive results, by executing prescribed duties, by receiving nourishment, by hearing about me, perfect knowledge of detachment, austerity, yoga, and self-absorption. By thus practicing seriously, the influence of Prakṛti over the jiva can be removed, just as wooden sticks that cause a fire are themselves consumed by it. And now Kapila Dev, he's going to answer Devahuti's question. And her question that even if the great fear of bondage is sometimes avoided by Sankhya, the inquiry about the fundamental principles, it may still reappear since its cause has not been deceased. So he's going to answer that question. That's what we're reading today. All right, let's begin. And Haribo Raseshwari Mataji Radhe Radhe Kargraj. Okay. Let me move this on to my. So we're just going to have a half-hour reading today. Short reading. We'll see where we get up to. I'm just opening up my second screen so that I can see comments. Okay. There. Line 24, right? Yes, yesterday. The influence of material nature has covered the living entity, and thus it is as if the living entity were always in a blazing fire. But by the process of seriously discharging devotional service, this influence can be removed, just as wooden sticks which cause a fire are themselves consumed by it. Bhukta bhoga parityakta drishta dosha nityasha neshvarasya shubham dhakte sve mahim nistitasya cha. By discovering the faultiness of his discharge of his let me just take a second here. Okay, I just have to get it up. By discovering the faultiness of his desiring to lord it over material nature, and by therefore giving it up, the living entity becomes independent and stands in his own glory. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Because the living entity is not actually the enjoyer of the material resources, his attempt to lord it over material nature is, at the ultimate issue, frustrated. As a result of frustration, he desires more power than the ordinary living entity, and thus he wants to merge into the existence of the supreme enjoyer. In this way, he develops a plan for greater enjoyment. When one is actually situated in devotional service, that is his independent position. Less intelligent men cannot understand the position of the eternal servant of the Lord. Because the word servant is used, they become confused. They cannot understand that this servitude is not the servitude of this material world. To be the servant of the Lord is the greatest position. If one can understand this, and can thus revive one's original nature of eternal servitorship of the Lord, one stands fully independent. A living entity's independence is lost by material contact. In the spiritual field, he has full independence, and therefore there is no question of becoming dependent upon the three modes of material nature. This position is attained by a devotee, and therefore he gives up the tendency for material enjoyment after seeing its faultiness. The difference between a devotee and an impersonalist is that an impersonalist tries to become one with the Supreme so that he can enjoy without impediment, whereas a devotee gives up the entire mentality of enjoying and engages in a transcendental loving service of the Lord. That is his constitutional glorified position. At that time, he is Ishvara, fully independent. The real Ishvara, or Ishvara Parama, the Supreme Ishvara, or Supreme Independent, is Krishna. A living entity is Ishvara only when engaged in the service of the Lord. In other words, transcendental pleasure derived from loving service to the Lord is actual independence. Yata hrapratibudhasya prasvapo bhavanartabhrit sa eva pratibudhasya navai mohaya kalpate. In the dreaming state, one's consciousness is almost covered, and one sees many inauspicious things. But when he is awakened and fully conscious, such inauspicious things cannot bewilder him. Purport. In the condition of dreaming, when one's consciousness is almost covered, one may see many unfavorable things which cause disturbance or anxiety. But upon awakening, although he remembers what had happened in the dream, he is not disturbed. Similarly, the position of self-realization, or understanding of one's real relationship with the Supreme Lord, makes one completely satisfied, and the three modes of material nature, which are the cause of all disturbances, cannot affect him. In contaminated consciousness, one sees everything to be for his own enjoyment. But in pure consciousness, or Krishna consciousness, one sees that everything exists for the enjoyment of the Supreme Enjoyer. That is the difference between the dream state and wakefulness. The state of contaminated consciousness is compared to dream consciousness, and Krishna consciousness is compared to the awakened stage of life. Actually, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita, the only absolute enjoyer is Krishna. One who can understand that Krishna is the proprietor of all of the three worlds, and that he is the friend of everyone, is peaceful and independent. That person is peaceful and independent. As long as a conditioned soul does not have this knowledge, he wants to be the enjoyer of everything. He wants to become a humanitarian or philanthropist and open hospitals and schools for his fellow human beings. This is all illusion, for one cannot benefit anyone by such material activities. If one wishes to benefit his fellow brother, he must awaken his dormant Krishna consciousness. The Krishna conscious position is that of Pratibuddha, which means pure consciousness. Evam viditta tattvasya prakritir manasam yunjato na patkuruta atmaramasya karhichit. The influence of material nature cannot harm an enlightened soul, even though he engages in material activities, because he knows the truth of the Absolute, and his mind is fixed on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport. Lord Kapila says that my manasam, a devotee whose mind is always fixed upon the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is called the Atma Rama, or Viditta Tattva. Atma Ram means one who rejoices in the self, or one who enjoys in the spiritual atmosphere. Atma, in the material sense, means the body or the mind. But when referring to one whose mind is fixed on the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, Atma Ram means one who is fixed in spiritual activities in relationship with the Supreme Soul. The Supreme Soul is the personality of Godhead, and the individual soul is the living entity. When they engage in reciprocation of service and benediction, The living entity is said to be in the Atma-Rama position. This Atma-Rama position can be attained by one who knows the truth as it is. The truth is that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the enjoyer, and that the living entities are meant for his service and enjoyment. One who knows this truth, and who tries to engage all resources in the service of the Lord, escapes all material reactions and the influences of the modes of material nature. An example may be cited in this connection. Just as a materialist engages in constructing a big skyscraper, a devotee engages in constructing a big temple for Vishnu. Superficially, the skyscraper constructor and temple constructor are on the same level, for both are controlling wood, stone, iron, and other building materials. But the person who constructs a skyscraper is a materialist, and the person who constructs a temple of Vishnu is Atma-Ram. The materialist tries to satisfy himself in relation to his body by constructing a skyscraper, but the devotee tries to satisfy the super self, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by constructing the temple. By constructing the temple. Although both are engaged in the association of material activities, the devotee is liberated, and the materialist is conditioned. This is because the devotee, who is constructing the temple, has fixed his mind upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but the non-devotee, who is constructing the skyscraper, has his mind fixed in sense gratification. If while performing any activity, even in material existence, one's mind is fixed upon the lotus feet of the Personality of Godhead, one will not be entangled or conditioned. The worker in devotional service, in full Krishna consciousness, is always independent of the influence of material nature. Yadaivam adhyatma rata kalena bahujanmana saratra jata vairagya abrahma bhuvanan muni. When a person thus engages in devotional service and self-realization for many, many years and births, he becomes completely reluctant to enjoy any one of the material planets, even up to the highest planet, which is known as Brahmaloka. He becomes fully developed in consciousness. Purport. Anyone engaged in devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead is known as a devotee. But there is a distinction between pure devotees and mixed devotees. A mixed devotee engages in devotional service for the spiritual benefit of being eternally engaged in the transcendental abode of the Lord in full bliss and knowledge. In material existence, when a devotee is not completely purified, he expects material benefit from the Lord in the form of relief from material miseries, or he wants material gain, advancement in knowledge of the relationship between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity, or knowledge as to the real nature of the Supreme Lord. When a person is transcendental to these conditions, he is called a pure devotee. He does not engage himself in the service of the Lord for any material benefit or for understanding of the Supreme Lord. This is interesting, huh? His one interest is that he loves the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he spontaneously engages in satisfying him. This is really counterintuitive, to me at least. It's really nice. I like it though. So a mixed devotee engages in the service of the Lord for any material benefit or for understanding of the Supreme Lord. But we're not trying to understand the Supreme Lord. What we want is, we want to love the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We don't want to just try to understand him. We want to just love him and spontaneously engage in satisfying him. The highest example of pure devotional service is that of the gopis in Vrindavan. They are not interested in understanding Krishna, but only in loving him. Don't you love when Srila Prabhupada does this? will be on any topic that doesn't seem, like such a high topic, but then all of a sudden he brings it to the gopis. He's done that so many times now. So yeah, the gopis are not interested in understanding Krishna, but only in loving him. That platform of love is a pure state of devotional service. Unless one is advanced to this pure state of devotional service, there is a tendency to desire elevation to a higher material position. A mixed devotee may desire to enjoy a comfortable life on another planet with a greater span of life, such as on Brahmaloka. These are material desires. But because a mixed devotee engages in the service of the Lord, ultimately, after many, many lives of material enjoyment, he undoubtedly develops Krishna consciousness. And the symptom of this Krishna consciousness is that he is no longer interested in any sort of materially elevated life. He does not even aspire to become a personality like Lord Brahma. There is a verse missing, a line missing from this. Let's see, 7 lines. Okay. Mar bhakta pratibhudarto mat prasadena bhuyasa nishreyasam swasangstanam kaivalyakyam marashrayam. Okay, give me a second here to open up on my phone. I have the Pocket Data app. This is chapter 27, verse 28. Okay, here is the line that's missing. Prapnoti hanjasa dhira swadrisha chena sankshaya yargatva na nivarteta yogi lingad vinirgame. My devotee actually becomes self-realized by my unlimited causeless mercy, and thus, when freed from all doubts, he steadily progresses towards his destined abode, which is directly under the protection of my spiritual energy of unadulterated bliss. That is the ultimate perfectional goal of the living entity. After giving up the present material body, the mystic devotee goes to that transcendental abode and never comes back. Purport. Actual self-realization means becoming a pure devotee of the Lord. The existence of a devotee implies the function of devotion and the object of devotion. Self-realization ultimately means to understand the personality of Godhead and the living entities. To know the individual self and the reciprocal exchanges of loving service between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity is real self-realization. This cannot be attained by the impersonalists or other transcendentalists. They cannot understand the science of devotional service. Devotional service is revealed to the pure devotee by the unlimited causeless mercy of the Lord. This is especially spoken here by the Lord Mat Prasadena, by my special grace. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Only those who engage in devotional service with love and faith receive the necessary intelligence from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, so that gradually and progressively they can advance to the abode of the Personality of Godhead. Nishreyasa means the ultimate destination. Swasangstana indicates that the impersonalists have no particular place to stay. The impersonalists sacrifice their individuality so that the living spark can merge into the impersonal effulgence emanating from the transcendental body of the Lord. But the devotee has a specific abode. The planets rest in the sunshine, but the sunshine itself has no particular resting place. When one reaches a particular planet, then he has a resting place. The spiritual sky, which is known as Kaivalya, is simply a blissful light on all sides, and it is under the protection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 14:27, Brahmano hi pratishtaham, The impersonal Brahman effulgence rests on the body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In other words, the bodily effulgence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is Kaivalya, or impersonal Brahman. In that impersonal effulgence, there are spiritual planets, which are known as Vaikunthas, chief of which is Krishna Loka. Some devotees are elevated to the Vaikuntha planets, and some are elevated to the planet of Krishna Loka. According to the desire of the particular devotee, he is offered a particular abode, which is known as Swangsthana. Swangsthana, his desired destination. By the grace of the Lord, the self-realized devotee engaged in devotional service understands his destination even while in the material body. He therefore performs his devotional activities steadily, without doubting, and after quitting his material body, he at once reaches the destination for which he has prepared himself. After reaching that abode, he never comes back to this material world. The word lingad vinirgame, which are used here, the words lingad vinirgame, which are used here, mean after being freed from the two kinds of material bodies, the subtle and gross. The subtle body is made of mind, intelligence, false ego, and contaminated consciousness, and the gross body is made of 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. When one is transferred to the spiritual world, he gives up both the subtle and gross bodies of this material world. He enters the spiritual sky in his pure spiritual body and is stationed in one of the spiritual planets. Although the impersonalists also reach that spiritual sky after giving up the subtle and gross material bodies, they are not placed in the spiritual planets. As they desire, they are allowed to merge in the spiritual effulgence emanating from the transcendental body of the Lord. The word swasangstanam is also very significant. As a living entity prepares himself, so he attains his abode. The impersonal Brahman effulgence is offered to the impersonalist, but those who want to associate with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in its transcendental form as Narayan in the Vaikunthas, or as with Krishna in Krishna Loka, they go to those abodes, wherefrom they never return. Yadana yoga. One second, I'm just opening my second screen again. Yadana yoga pachita sucheto mayasu siddhasya vishajatenga ananya hetu shvata me gati syad atyantiki yatra namrituhasa. When a perfect yogi's attention is no longer attracted to the byproducts of mystic powers, which are manifestations of the external energy, his progress towards me becomes unlimited, and thus the power of death cannot overcome him. Purport. This is the last verse of this chapter. Yogis are generally attracted to the byproducts of mystic yogic power, for they can become smaller than the smallest or greater than the greatest, achieve anything they desire, have power even to create a planet or bring anyone they like under their subjection. Yogis who have incomplete information of the result of devotional service are attracted by these powers. But these powers are material. They have nothing to do with spiritual progress. As other material powers are created by the material energy, mystic yogic powers are also material. A perfect yogi's mind is not attracted by any material power, but it is simply attracted by unalloyed service to the Supreme Lord. For a devotee, the process of merging into the Brahman effulgence is considered to be hellish, and yogic power, or the preliminary perfection of yogic power, to be able to control the senses, is automatically achieved. As for elevation to higher planets, a devotee considers this to be simply hallucinatory. The devotee's attention is concentrated only upon the eternal loving service of the Lord, and therefore the power of death has no influence over him. In such a devotional state, A perfect yogi can attain the status of immortal knowledge and bliss. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purports of the third canto, 27th chapter of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, entitled Understanding Material Nature. So now we have 10 more minutes. So I'll just read a little bit of chapter 28. We'll see how far we get to in 10 minutes. And so, one second. How come it's not opening? So remember, this is Devahuti, question 4. This is Lord Kapila describes the meditation of this Ashtanga yoga system in detail, by which the yogi attains liberation without effort. That's a good question 4. Kapila's instructions on the execution of devotional service. Śrī-Bhāgavānuvaca Yogasya lakshanam vakshe sabijasya nripatmaje manoyenaiva vidhina prasannam yati satpatam. The personality of Godhead said, "My dear mother, O daughter of the king, I shall now explain to you the system of yoga, the object of which is to concentrate the mind. By practicing this system, one can be joyful and progressively advance towards the path of the absolute truth." Purport. The yoga process explained by Lord Kapiladev in this chapter is authorized and standard, and therefore these instructions should be followed very carefully. To begin, the Lord says that by yoga practice, one can make progress towards understanding the absolute truth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the previous chapter, it has been clearly stated that the desired result of yoga is not to achieve some wonderful mystic power. One should not be at all attracted by such mystic power, but should attain progressive realization on the path of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, which states in the last verse of the 6th chapter that the greatest yogi is he who constantly thinks of Krishna within himself, or he who is Krishna conscious. It is stated here that by following the system of yoga, one can become joyful. Lord Kapila, the personality of Godhead, who is the highest authority on yoga, here explains the yoga system known as Ashtanga Yoga, which comprises 8 different practices, namely Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayam, Pratyahar, Dharana, Dhyan, and Samadhi. By all these stages of practice, one must realize Lord Vishnu, who is the target of all yoga. There are so-called yoga practices in which one concentrates the mind on voidness or on the impersonal, but this is not approved by the authorized yoga system as explained by Kapiladev. Even Patanjali explains that the target of all yoga is Vishnu. Ashtanga Yoga is therefore part of Vaishnava practice because its ultimate goal is realization of Vishnu. The achievement of success in yoga is not an acquisition of mystic power, which is condemned in the previous chapter, but rather freedom from all material designations and situation in one's constitutional position. That is the ultimate achievement in yoga practice. So dharmacharanam shaktya vidharmachcha nivartatanam daivalabdhena santosha atma vicharanarchanam. One should execute his prescribed duties to the best of his ability and avoid performing duties not allotted to him. One should be satisfied with as much gain as he achieves by the grace of the Lord, and one should worship the lotus feet of the spiritual master. Purport. In this verse, there are many important words which could be very elaborately explained, but we shall briefly discuss the important aspects of each. The final statement is Atma-vid charanarchanam. Atma-vid means a self-realized soul or bona fide spiritual master. Unless one is self-realized and knows what is his relationship with the super soul is, he cannot be a bona fide spiritual master. Here it is recommended that one should seek out a bona fide spiritual master and surrender unto him, archana, for by inquiring from and worshipping him, one can learn spiritual activities. The first recommendation is Swadharma Charanam. As long as we have this material body, there are various duties prescribed for us. Such duties are divided by a system of 4 social orders: Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra. These particular duties are mentioned in the Shastra, and particularly in Bhagavad Gita. Swadharma Charanam means that one must discharge the prescribed duties of his particular division of society faithfully and to the best of his ability. One should not accept another's duty. If one is born in a particular society or community, he should perform the prescribed duties for that particular division. If, however, one is fortunate enough to transcend the designation of birth in a particular society or community by being elevated to the standard of spiritual identity, then his swadharma, or duty, is solely that of serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The actual duty of one who is advanced in Krishna consciousness is to serve the Lord. As long as one remains in the bodily concept of life, he may act according to the duties of social convention. But if one is elevated to the spiritual platform, he must simply serve the Supreme Lord. That is the real execution of Swadharma. Gramya dharma nivrittascha moksha dharma ratistata mitta medha dhanam shashva vivikta kshema sevanam. One should cease performing conventional religious practices and should be attracted to those which lead to salvation. One should eat very frugally and should always remain secluded so that he can achieve the highest perfection of life. It is recommended herein that religious practice for economic development or the satisfaction of sense desires should be avoided. Religious practices should be executed only to gain freedom from the clutches of material nature. It is stated in the beginning of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam that the topmost religious practice is that by which one can attain the transcendental devotional service of the Lord without reason or cause, ahoituki bhakti. Such religious practice is never hampered by any impediments, and by its performance, one actually becomes satisfied. Here, this is recommended as moksha dharma, religious practice for salvation, or transcendence of the clutches of material contamination. Generally, people execute religious practices for economic development or sense gratification, but that is not recommended for one who wants to advance in yoga. The next important phrase is mita medhadhanam, which means that one should eat very frugally. It is recommended in the Vedic literatures that a yogi eats only half what he desires according to his hunger. Oh my God, that sounds horrible. Sorry. If one is so hungry that he could devour 1 pound of foodstuffs, then instead of eating 1 pound, he should consume only half a pound, and supplement this with 4 ounces of water. 1/4 of the stomach should be left empty for the passage of air in the stomach. If one eats in this manner, he will avoid indigestion and disease. The yogi should eat in this way, as recommended in the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam and all other standard scriptures. The yogi should live in a secluded place where his yoga practice will not be disturbed. Okay, I think we will end here. Right? What is this? This is verse 4. One should practice nonviolent. Let's see. What are we? Yeah, so we'll end here, verse 3. We'll read from verse 4 tomorrow. And Oh, it's not in this book. I don't have it. But anyhow, 1 second. Let me just. Okay. So tomorrow we will read about Niyama Niyam.
It's 8 o'clock.
So we read, execute prescribed duties to the best of one's ability, avoid performing duties not allowed, satisfied with what is achieved by the Lord's grace, and then worshipping the lotus feet of the spiritual master. This is what we'll read tomorrow. Cessation of conventional religious practices, being attracted to those. Anyways, I won't read it all now. Okay. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol. Jai Shri Shri Guru Garamagandhari Giridhari Shri Shri Radha Vinod Bihari Ju Ki Jai Shri Govinda Gopinath Maran Mohan Ju Ki Jai Nityarupa Vishnu Vishnupad Ashtatara Shata Shri Srimad Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj Shri Gurudev Ki Jai Nityarupa Vishnu Vishnupad Ashtatara Shata Shri Srimad Bhakti Vedanta Vaman Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Nityarupa Vishnu Vishnupad Ashtatara Shata Shri Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai Nityarupa Vishnu Vishnupad Ashtatara Shata Shri Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Nityarupa Vishnu Vishnupad Ashtatara Shata Shri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada Ki Jai Nityarupa Vishnu Mahabhagavat Shri Goshadas Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Nityarupa Vishnu Shri Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai Nityarupa Vishnu Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Shri Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Rupanu Gauriya Guru Vara Ki Jai Rup Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jeev Gopal Bhatta Rashigunath Shara Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gopal Shada Vrinda Ki Jai Nama Jai Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Kshetra Mandal Gaura Mandal Vaja Mandal Mathura Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Sarva Abhishya Vedanta Giriraj Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Radhakund Shama Kund Ki Jai Shri Muna Devi Kanda Devi Ki Jai Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai Shri Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Shri Purnamasi Yogamaya Ki Jai Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev Ki Jai Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Samagata Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Nitai Gaura Grantaraj Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Ki Jai Shri Nitai Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Vindaya Tulsi Devaya Puraya Krishna Vashacha Krishna Bhakti Devi Sattvatai Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Dandavat Pranams. See you all tomorrow. Dandavat Pranams indeed, Mataji Haribo. Sorry I'm late today also. 3 minutes late, that's not too bad though, right? Okay, Haribo.